The great academy stood like a mountain of steel and stone rising high into the clouds. Its gates opened wide for another year of cadets. The air was filled with the thunder of alien voices, heavy boots, claws, and strange sounds echoing through the halls. Banners of many worlds hung from the walls, each showing the pride of a species that had fought for honor and survival. And among these towering students walked one who looked small, too small to belong. He was human, a cadet from a young world, his frame thin compared to the scaled giants, the feathered warriors, and the armored beasts that crowded the training grounds. He carried only a simple pack, his uniform plain, his face calm, eyes moving slowly across the chamber as if studying everything, yet showing no fear. The crowd noticed him at once. Whispers began to rise. Laughter followed. The human had arrived, and already he was marked as weak. Tall reptilian cadets leaned close to one another, their sharp teeth flashing as they hissed out jokes, their voices filled with cruel amusement. A group of feathered avians clicked their beaks, wings shaking as they mocked his slow walk. Even the hulking beasts of iron skin let out deep growls of laughter. The human moved on, not turning his head, not answering a single word, as though the storm of mockery was nothing more than wind brushing against his skin. The instructor entered then, a broad alien with silver armor on his chest and scars across his arms. His voice roared across the hall like thunder, demanding silence. The cadet stood at attention, but when his eyes fell on the human, they softened with disbelief. A small chuckle escaped his throat. He turned to the crowd and raised a hand as if presenting some fragile relic, a token of comedy. "Behold the human," the instructor declared with bitter humor. "Behold the species of soft flesh and fragile bone." The hall erupted with cruel amusement. Boots pounded the floor, claws scraped against walls, wings slapped in rhythm with mocking joy. The human remained in the center, still calm, still silent, his face unreadable, his eyes steady like water that reflects but does not break. The silence within him became louder than the noise around him, and some began to notice, some began to wonder, though they did not yet admit it. The instructor continued to speak of strength, of honor, of survival, pointing at the human as though he were a lesson in weakness, a reminder of what not to be. Cadets nodded, believing every word, for to them strength was size, strength was armor, strength was claws and teeth and fire, and the human had none of these. But the human listened carefully, not to the laughter, not to the words of insult, but to the rhythm of the voices, the way the instructor moved, the pattern of the hall. He observed as though each detail carried meaning, as though each insult was simply another part of a larger lesson. Outside the chamber the storm roared, skies filled with heavy clouds, lightning flashing across distant peaks. Yet inside the human remained unmoved, his silence almost unnatural. It was not the silence of fear, not the silence of weakness. It was the silence of patience, as though he was waiting for something, as though he had already seen what would happen. His hands rested at his sides, his steps careful, each movement measured, each breath slow. The cadets began to gather closer, forming a circle around him, their eyes filled with scorn. Some spat words of challenge, others growled, feathers ruffled, tails lashed, all expecting the human to shrink back, to falter, to collapse under the weight of their numbers. Yet the human simply looked at them one by one, not glaring, not bowing, simply meeting their gaze and holding it with quiet strength. The laughter grew softer for reasons they could not name. One cadet, a towering scaled beast with arms like tree trunks, leaned down close, his hot breath heavy with the scent of iron. He whispered mockery, promising that the human would not last a single day, that his bones would be crushed in the first trial. The human blinked slowly, his voice quiet, steady, without anger. "We will see," he said, nothing more, and that was enough to leave the larger cadet unsettled, though he did not show it. The instructor called an end to the gathering, ordering the cadets toward the training hall. Yet as they moved, the human's presence lingered in their minds, a small figure who had not broken, who had not bent, who had not answered insult with rage or fear. Instead, he had carried silence like a weapon, patience like armor, and though none of them would admit it, they felt a strange unease, a shadow of something they did not yet understand. The training would begin soon, trials that would test the strength of every cadet, and many expected the human to fail before the first hour was done. Yet deep within, where words and laughter could not reach. Some felt a quiet question rising. What if he did not fail? What if the silence meant something more? What if the human was not what he seemed? The gates to the training hall opened, light spilling across the polished floor. Cadets marched forward with pride, claws clattering, wings folding, heavy feet shaking the ground. And at the center of it all walked the human, small but steady, silent but strong, mocked by all yet untouched. And though none of them could see it, the storm that would soon break had already begun with his first quiet step into the academy. The training hall stretched like a cavern carved from metal and stone. High ceilings glowed with pale light, and the floor was marked with circles of combat where cadets would be tested one by one. The air carried the sound of weapons striking, bodies colliding, and voices raised in shouts of effort and victory. The instructor stood at the center, his scarred arms crossed, his eyes sharp as he studied the gathering of young warriors from across the galaxy. His voice rumbled like thunder as he called them to order. Today you prove yourselves. Today you show who deserves the path of a soldier, who will be broken, and who will rise. The cadets lined up, their armor gleaming, their claws flexing, feathers spread, tails whipping with energy, all eager to display their strength, all eager to leave others in the dust of shame. They pushed and shoved, eager to stand closer to the circles, eager to be seen by the instructor and perhaps by commanders who watched from the shadows above. The human stood near the end of the line, his frame small, his face calm, his eyes steady as they scanned the room with quiet patience. No one wanted to stand beside him, and so the space around him remained empty, a silent mark of scorn. The first bouts began. 2 cadets entered the circle, their movements fierce. Strikes echoed across the chamber, blows strong enough to shake the air. One fell, the other roared in triumph. The crowd cheered. More stepped forward. Again and again the contests were fought. Scales flashed, feathers blurred, armored hides cracked against one another. Every fall brought laughter, and every victory brought pride. Yet each time the human remained silent, watching, his gaze following every step, every strike, every mistake, every success, as though storing them in his mind. Soon whispers began to rise again, voices filled with mockery and cruel amusement. The human will never last. He will fall with one strike. His bones will break like twigs. He will cry out and beg to be spared. One scaled cadet sneered loud enough for all to hear, pointing at him with a clawed finger. Let the soft one fight. Let us all see how long his flesh lasts. The laughter roared once more, wings flapping, tails lashing. The circle of scorn closed around him. The instructor's gaze fell upon the human then, his eyes narrowing. Perhaps he shared the doubt of the others. Perhaps he wanted to test the one who had walked in silence. Perhaps he wanted to crush whatever quiet defiance lingered in that calm face. His voice rose like a command of judgment. Cadet human, step forward. Enter the circle. Face your test. Prove yourself or be dismissed. The hall grew silent in expectation. Claws tapped. Wings rustled. Hearts pounded. All waiting for the human to falter. All waiting for the moment of collapse. The human moved, his steps light but steady, his shoulders relaxed, his breathing slow. No tremor of fear in his face. No hint of hesitation in his stride. He entered the circle and stood tall in the center. Though small in frame, his presence seemed to fill more space than it should. He looked at the instructor and gave a single nod, his voice calm and quiet. I am ready. Nothing more, nothing less. And for a moment the silence was heavier than any laughter. The instructor turned and called for an opponent. And it was not just any cadet who stepped forward, but the captain of the squad, the largest, strongest, and most feared among them. His body scaled like armor, his arms thick as stone pillars, his claws long and sharp, his voice a growl that made the walls tremble. He stepped into the circle with a cruel grin. The crowd erupted in cheers and mocking chants. The captain will crush the human. The captain will end this farce. The captain will leave him broken on the floor. The human did not flinch. He met the captain's gaze with steady eyes, his calm expression unchanged. The captain snarled and circled him, his massive form casting a long shadow across the floor. His tail thrashed, claws clicking against the ground. His every move screamed of power and certainty. He believed the fight would last no more than a breath. The human waited, his stance simple, his hands at his sides, as if he carried no weapon at all. Yet his eyes watched every twitch, every shift of weight, every breath the captain drew. The instructor gave the signal, and the challenge began. The captain lunged forward with a roar, his clawed hand sweeping wide like a blade of iron. The crowd shouted with glee. But the human moved at the very last instant. A step sideways, a tilt of his shoulder. The claw missed him by a whisper. The captain stumbled past, his eyes flashing with sudden fury. The cadets laughed again, claiming it was luck, nothing more than a blind stumble of fortune. But the instructor frowned, his gaze sharp, for he had seen the precision and the timing. The captain turned, his anger burning hotter, his movements faster. Another strike, another blow, claws crashing through the air. The human slid aside again, his step small but exact, his body never meeting the full force of the attack. The crowd grew restless, the laughter thinner now, replaced by murmurs of confusion. The human still stood, untouched, his breath steady, his eyes calm, as though he had already known where each strike would fall before it began. The captain growled with rage, striking again and again, each blow heavier than the last, claws tearing through the air, fists slamming against the ground. Yet always the human moved, never too far, never too fast, only just enough, as though guided by something unseen. The crowd fell into silence now, their earlier laughter fading like smoke, their eyes wide as they watched the fragile one stand against the storm of power, not breaking, not falling, simply moving with quiet grace. The human raised his hand at last, not in a fist, not in aggression, but a simple gesture, a palm extended forward, calm and steady, his voice quiet but clear. "Are you sure you want this?" The words froze the air. The cadets exchanged uneasy glances. The captain snarled with defiance, his pride burning too fierce to stop. He roared and launched forward again, this time with his full strength, his body like a hammer of flesh and bone, determined to crush the human in one final blow. The moment stretched like eternity. The human shifted, his steps light, his body moving with precision. The captain's strike missed again, the sound of claws against stone echoing like thunder. The captain stumbled, rage boiling in his eyes. The human remained standing, his calm face unchanged, and for the first time the fear began to spread among the watching cadets, for they could not understand, they could not explain, how a fragile body could stand against so much force without breaking. The instructor's eyes narrowed even further, his mind racing, his heart uneasy. He began to realize that this human was not what they thought, not what they mocked. Something else lingered beneath the silence, something sharp, something dangerous. And though the battle was not yet over, the hall already felt changed, the laughter gone, the scorn weakened, the shadow of respect beginning to creep in against their will. And so the challenge continued, the storm of strength against the calm of silence, the clash of pride against patience. And every cadet watching knew that whatever happened next would not be forgotten, for the human had already turned their scorn into unease, their laughter into questions, their certainty into doubt, and the fight was only just beginning. The circle of combat was alive with the echo of claws scraping against the floor, with the sound of cadets whispering sharp words, with the weight of expectation pressing down like a storm that refused to break. The human stood at the center of it all, his shoulders relaxed, his breath steady, his eyes fixed on the captain who towered before him. The captain sneered, his pride wounded by the failure of his first attacks, his tail whipping the air like a chain of iron, his voice filled with rage, as he declared that the next strike would leave the human crushed and silent forever. The cadets laughed again, though their laughter carried less certainty now. Some forced a sound out of their throats, as if they needed to cling to mockery in order to hide their growing unease. Others leaned forward, eyes narrowed, trying to understand how the fragile one had lasted even this long. A few shifted uncomfortably, their claws and wings moving without reason, as though their instincts were warning them of something hidden. The instructor watched with arms crossed, his gaze sharp and unblinking. He did not laugh, he did not mock, he only studied, waiting for the truth to reveal itself. The captain circled the human, his heavy steps making the floor vibrate, every muscle in his body tense, his scales flashing beneath the light, his claws scraping lines into the metal as though promising destruction. The human moved very little, only enough to adjust his stance, his eyes never leaving the captain, his silence cutting deeper than words ever could. The tension grew heavy, pressing against the lungs of everyone in the hall. No one spoke now. No one dared to breathe too loud. All waited for the next clash. The captain lunged again, his massive body driving forward with the weight of a mountain, claws outstretched like blades meant to rip through flesh and bone. The human shifted at the last instant, his body bending in ways that seemed too precise to be chance. The strike missed again. The captain roared in fury. The cadets gasped, their voices rising in disbelief. How could this fragile figure keep evading such power? How could his thin arms and light steps defy the weight of a beast who had broken countless foes before? How could weakness look so much like mastery? The human did not answer their unspoken questions. His calm expression never changed. His movements never wasted. Every step he took was measured, every breath controlled. His silence was not fear. It was command. His patience was not hesitation. It was control. And slowly the crowd began to feel it. The strange shift from amusement to dread, from confidence to unease, as though the fight was no longer a contest, but a demonstration. The captain attacked again and again, each strike louder, each swing faster, his roar shaking the walls, his pride driving him into madness. The human slid aside, ducked under, twisted away, always just enough, always without panic, as though every blow was seen long before it was thrown. Sweat dripped from the scaled warrior. His movements grew desperate, but the human remained untouched, calm as stone, light as wind, every motion painting a picture of control that none could deny. The cadets who had mocked now whispered to one another, their voices trembling. They asked how this could be. They asked what trick was being used. They asked why the instructor allowed it. Their eyes followed the human like prey watching a hunter. Though they did not yet admit it, their laughter was gone now, replaced by silence, replaced by fear that slowly spread like fire in dry grass. They felt something shift in the balance of power, though they could not name it. The captain staggered for a moment, his breath heavy, his chest heaving, sweat shining on his scales, rage burning in his eyes. He raised his head and let out a roar that shook the entire hall, a roar meant to remind all that he was still the strongest, still the leader, still the captain of this squad. But even as the sound echoed, the human did not move, did not flinch. He simply raised his hand again, palm open, fingers steady, a silent gesture that carried more weight than 1,000 words. It was not defiance, it was invitation. It was a command hidden in calm. The captain could not refuse. His pride chained him. His fury blinded him. He roared again and charged, every muscle straining, every claw extended, his body a weapon of raw destruction. The cadets held their breath, some covering their eyes, expecting to see the human torn apart. Yet deep inside many already feared what would come instead, for the human had not shown fear, had not shown weakness, and their instincts whispered that pride was about to meet ruin. The clash came in a blur of movement, too fast for most to follow. The captain's strike arced down with the force of a collapsing tower. The human twisted, his body flowing like water, his foot sliding with perfect precision, his hand moving with quiet certainty. And then the captain stumbled past him, his balance broken, his claws striking nothing but empty air. The human's calm voice cut through the silence, quiet yet sharp. Strength without control is weakness. The words struck harder than any fist, echoing in the minds of all who heard them. The cadets gasped, their eyes wide, their bodies trembling. Some stepped back, as if they had seen something unnatural. Others stared in silence, their disbelief too great to form words. The instructor's eyes narrowed, his scars seeming to deepen as he studied the human with grim thought. He knew now that this was not chance, not luck, not mistake. This was skill, this was design, and it carried with it a danger he had not prepared for. The captain roared again, refusing to accept defeat, his pride unbroken even as his body stumbled. He turned and lunged once more, his claws faster, his strikes sharper, every move a storm of fury. But the human moved again, calm and patient, his body flowing like the current of a river, his steps light yet precise, his timing flawless. Each attack passed him by. Each strike met with nothing but empty air, and the captain grew weaker with every failed attempt. The crowd could not believe their eyes. Their laughter was gone, their certainty shattered. They had mocked, they had scorned, they had laughed until their voices cracked. But now they stood in silence, watching a human, a fragile figure of flesh and bone, defy everything they had believed about strength and power. The fear in their hearts grew heavy. The silence pressed against their minds. They realized that they were no longer watching a joke. They were watching something else, something they did not yet understand but could not ignore. The human stood steady, his eyes calm, his breath slow, his silence heavy. The battle was still ongoing, but the war of perception had already been won. Laughter had turned to whispers. Whispers had turned to silence. Silence had turned to fear. And though the captain still fought, though his pride still drove him, the truth was already clear. The human had changed the meaning of strength in that hall forever, and the true lesson had only just begun. The hall trembled beneath the sound of the captain's roar, his body lunging forward again and again. Each strike meant to tear the human apart, each blow carrying the fury of a warrior who could not accept defeat. Yet with every furious charge the fragile cadet moved with quiet patience, his body shifting only as much as needed, his steps so light that his boots barely touched the floor, his eyes steady and calm, watching every movement of the captain with a focus that pierced deeper than any claw or fang could reach. The crowd of cadets felt the weight of silence pressing against their chests, for the laughter was gone now, replaced by something heavy, something sharp, something that made the air itself feel colder. The instructor stood unmoving at the edge of the circle, his arms crossed, his gaze unblinking. The scarred veteran, who had once smirked at the sight of a human, now narrowed his eyes, his thoughts racing like storms hidden beneath the surface of calm. He could not deny what he saw. This was no accident, no trick, no coward's luck. This was control. This was mastery born of something he had not expected to see, from flesh so thin, bones so fragile, and yet it stood there, refusing to yield, refusing to break, a shadow of strength beyond what the academy had ever taught. The captain growled, his pride bleeding into rage, his movements losing precision with every failed strike, his breath coming in ragged bursts, sweat running across his scales, his claws slashing the air with wild fury. The human continued to move as though time itself bent for him, each sidestep graceful, each twist exact, each lean of his body calculated with perfect awareness. The crowd shifted uneasily, claws tapped nervously against the floor, feathers rustled, tails whipped there. Instincts screamed that something was wrong, that the balance of power was turning before their very eyes. For generations they had believed strength was size, that strength was weight, that strength was claws and armor. Yet here was one who had none of those, one who should have fallen within seconds, and yet he stood untouched, silent, steady, unbroken. The cadets exchanged looks with one another. Some whispered questions too quiet to carry far. Others clenched their fists in denial, refusing to believe what their eyes told them. Yet all felt the truth crawling into their thoughts, a shift that none could stop. The captain launched again, his strike heavy enough to crack the floor beneath his claws. The human bent like water flowing around stone, his movement so simple yet so exact that it left the massive warrior stumbling past with nothing to strike. The cadets gasped, their voices rising with disbelief. The human raised his hand again, palm open, calm and still, his voice soft but sharp. Strength without control is nothing. The words echoed like thunder even though they were spoken with quiet breath. The crowd froze, their minds burning with the weight of the lesson. The instructor inhaled slowly, his scarred jaw tightening, his heart unwilling to admit respect yet unable to deny it. He saw what the cadets could not fully grasp. He saw a mind trained to see patterns, to read weakness, to wait for the precise instant when strength became its own downfall. And though the battle was far from over, the instructor felt the tide had already shifted. The human had taken control not with power of muscle, but with power of silence, of patience, of knowledge, and that was more dangerous than claws or fangs could ever be. The captain stumbled back, his chest heaving, his pride screaming within him, his eyes burning with fury. He looked at the human and saw not fear, but calm defiance, a calm that enraged him further. He roared again and leapt, claws flashing, tail swinging, his entire body crashing down like a storm. But the human moved again, his steps a whisper across the floor, his body twisting with effortless grace. The strike missed. The roar of fury turned into a cry of frustration. The crowd shivered, their earlier amusement now buried beneath the cold weight of realization. They were not watching a fragile creature struggle. They were watching pride collapse. The human said nothing more, his silence louder than any roar, his calm eyes sharper than any weapon. Each breath steady, each step patient, and the cadets began to feel it in their bones. The shift of power, the collapse of old certainty, the rise of something they had never prepared for. They had mocked, they had scorned, they had laughed, yet now they felt their laughter turn into fear, their scorn turn into unease, their pride turn into questions they could not answer. One cadet whispered to another, his voice trembling, "How does he do this? How does he move like that? How does he see what is coming before it comes?" The answer did not come, for none could explain, none could deny. The human was showing them a kind of strength that had nothing to do with size or claws or armor. It was a strength that lived in the mind, in the heart, in the patience to wait and the wisdom to strike at the right time, and it terrified them more than any blow could. The captain tried again, his fury burning hotter, his claws swiping faster, his strikes wilder. But the more he fought, the weaker he grew, his pride clouding his precision, his strength turning into wasted fury. The human remained untouched, his body flowing with quiet certainty, and the cadets finally saw it, the truth they had refused to admit. The human was not surviving by accident. He was controlling the battle. He was guiding it. He was making the captain stumble deeper into his own failure, and that realization shook them more than any strike could. The instructor raised his voice then, calling for silence though none had spoken, his tone heavy with authority, his words sharp as blades. "Cadets, remember this. What you see here is the truth of combat. Strength without wisdom is a burden. Rage without control is death." His gaze locked on the human as he spoke, though his words reached every corner of the hall, and though he did not admit it openly, there was respect hidden beneath his harsh tone, respect he had not expected to feel. The human gave no answer. His silence remained, his eyes fixed on the captain, who now panted with exhaustion, his scales glistening with sweat, his pride cracked like stone struck by lightning. The crowd watched in heavy silence, their thoughts a storm of disbelief and fear. They had come to mock, to laugh, to scorn, yet now they felt the truth pressing against them. The human had shifted the balance of the hall. The meaning of strength itself had changed, and though the fight was not yet finished, all knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The captain staggered forward once more, unwilling to surrender, unwilling to accept the collapse of his pride. His claws raised, his voice hoarse with fury, but his movements lacked the sharpness they once carried, his steps heavy, his strikes desperate. The human moved again, light as wind, calm as water, his presence unshaken, his control absolute. And in that moment the crowd realized what they were truly witnessing, not the survival of weakness against strength, but the victory of patience against pride, of mind against muscle, of humanity against all expectation. The silence inside the training hall grew heavier than steel. The cadets stood frozen around the circle, their eyes locked on the human and the captain. The storm of mockery had died. The storm of laughter had turned to ashes. All that remained was the weight of expectation pressing on every chest. The captain's pride was wounded beyond repair, his body trembling with rage, his scales glistening with sweat, his claws curled into weapons of desperation, his breath ragged, his tail thrashing like a whip of iron. Yet still he would not surrender, still he would not bend, for surrender to a human was unthinkable to him, unthinkable to them all. The human stood calm, his shoulders straight, his gaze unwavering, his breathing steady, his presence more like a stone carved by centuries than flesh and blood. He did not roar, he did not growl, he did not seek to impress. He simply waited, his silence louder than any threat, his patience sharper than any blade. And the cadets felt it in their bones, the certainty that something inevitable was about to happen, something that would leave the hall forever changed. The captain roared again, his voice raw, his fury burning through every word. He lunged forward, his claws sweeping in a strike meant to finish what his pride demanded. The floor shook beneath his weight. The air cracked with the force of his blow. The cadets gasped, some turning their eyes away, unable to watch the fragile body of the human be torn apart. Yet when the strike landed, it struck nothing but empty air. The human had moved, not with speed born of panic, not with luck born of chance, but with the same perfect awareness that had guided him before, his body flowing just enough to let the storm pass by without touching him. The captain stumbled forward, his claws scraping sparks from the metal floor. His body twisted as he tried to recover. But before he could regain his balance, the human stepped in, his movements exact, his hand rising, not in a wild strike, not in fury, but in a motion so controlled that it seemed unreal. His palm touched the captain's arm, his body shifted, his weight redirected, and in a single instant the strength of the captain became the weapon of his own downfall. The sound came sharp and clear, a crack that echoed through the hall like lightning striking the peak of a mountain. The captain's arm twisted beneath the precision of the human's motion. His body crashed to the ground with a force that shook the circle. His roar turned into a cry of pain. His pride shattered as surely as the bone within him. The cadets gasped as one, their voices breaking into cries of disbelief, their eyes wide with shock. They had expected the human to fall, but instead it was the captain who lay broken on the floor. The instructor's eyes widened, his scarred face hardening as he realized the truth of what had just unfolded. This was no accident. This was no trick of fortune. This was mastery. This was control. This was strength hidden beneath patience and silence. Strength that turned pride into weakness. Strength that turned power into downfall. The hall was still, the cadets frozen, the captain writhing in pain, his broken body a symbol of something none of them had believed possible. The human stood above him, calm as ever, his face showing no triumph, no cruelty, no mockery, only the same steady silence that had carried him since his first step into the academy. He did not gloat. He did not roar. He did not demand respect. He simply stood, his breath even, his gaze unwavering, his presence undeniable. And in that moment the cadets felt fear unlike any they had known, for they understood that what they had laughed at, what they had mocked, what they had scorned, was something far beyond them. The captain struggled to rise, his pride refusing to yield even as his body betrayed him. His claws dug into the floor, his broken arm hanging useless, his voice a growl of humiliation and rage. Yet he could not stand. His legs shook, his strength fading. The human watched without malice, his silence a mercy sharper than pity, his calm a blade cutting through the last fragments of pride. The cadets could not look away, their breaths shallow, their hearts pounding, their minds filled with the sound of that single crack that had ended the illusion of superiority. The instructor stepped forward at last, his heavy boots echoing across the floor, his voice cold as iron enough. His command rolled across the chamber like thunder. The fight is ended. The captain is defeated. The lesson is clear. The cadets shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between the broken form of their leader and the silent figure of the human. Their thoughts tangled, their beliefs shattered, for the truth stood before them in undeniable form. The fragile one had broken the strongest among them, and he had done it with patience, with silence, with precision. The human lowered his hand, stepping back, giving space to the fallen captain. He did not look to the crowd. He did not seek their recognition. He simply returned to stillness, his posture unshaken, his calm unbroken. The silence stretched long and heavy, pressing on every cadet like a weight they could not lift. Their claws tapped nervously, their feathers shifted, their tails flicked, but none spoke. None dared to laugh. None dared to mock, for they had seen the truth, and the truth silenced them. The captain was carried away by aides, his body trembling, his pride shattered, his roar gone. The sight of his defeat lingered in every eye. The hall that had once roared with laughter now stood in fearful silence. The cadets avoided the gaze of the human, afraid of what they might see there, afraid of what it meant. The instructor looked at him with new eyes, eyes that no longer held scorn, eyes that no longer carried doubt, eyes that carried the weight of a realization he could not ignore. The human did not smile. He did not move. He did not speak. But his presence filled the hall, larger than the scaled warriors, larger than the feathered hunters, larger than the armored beasts. He had shown them that strength was not what they thought, that weakness was not what they mocked, that power was not what they believed. He had broken more than the captain. He had broken the very idea that had kept humanity dismissed and scorned, and though no words were spoken, every cadet knew it. The silence was complete, the lesson burned into the bones of all who had witnessed it. And though the training would continue, though the academy would go on, nothing would be the same again, for in the space of a single clash, in the moment of one sharp break, a human had changed the balance of power. A human had turned laughter into fear. A human had shown them what patience and knowledge could do to pride and strength, and they would never forget it. The hall no longer roared with laughter, no longer echoed with mocking words, no longer shook with prideful voices. Instead it carried only silence, a silence so heavy that every cadet felt it pressing down upon their hearts. The captain had been carried away, his broken arm hanging limp, his voice silenced by pain and humiliation. The circle that once seemed like a stage for mockery had turned into an altar where pride was shattered. The human stood at its center, his frame small, his body unarmored, yet his presence larger than any warrior in the room. He had spoken few words. He had made few movements. Yet those few had turned the world upside down for those who watched. The instructor kept his arms folded, his scarred jaw tight, his voice silent for now, his eyes fixed on the human as if searching for something deeper than flesh, something hidden beneath the calm expression. He knew battle. He knew power. He knew the difference between luck and mastery, and what he had seen was mastery that none of his lessons had prepared him for. The cadets shifted uncomfortably, claws scraping nervously against the floor, wings folding tight, tails twitching. No one dared to speak. No one dared to laugh. No one dared to meet the human's eyes. Fear crept through them like a shadow, silent yet unstoppable. They had mocked him as fragile, weak, soft. They had called him prey. They had laughed at his quiet steps. But now those same quiet steps echoed louder than any roar. They looked at him differently. They tried not to, but they could not stop. In their minds the image of the captain breaking replayed again and again. The sound of the sharp crack rang in their ears. The memory of the human's calm face burned in their thoughts, and the question none wished to ask rose inside them. If one cadet could do this, what could an army of his kind do? One feathered cadet leaned toward another, his voice a trembling whisper. He is not like us. He sees the strikes before they are made. He reads the body like a scroll. The other shushed him quickly, afraid the human might hear, afraid that even whispering might draw the gaze of those calm eyes, those eyes that seemed to pierce deeper than scales or feathers or armor, those eyes that seemed to see the very shape of thought itself. Fear grew sharper inside them, not fear of claws, not fear of teeth, but fear of something they did not understand, fear of silence, fear of patience, fear of control. The instructor finally spoke, his voice slow, his words heavy. Cadets, you have witnessed what few are willing to admit. Strength is not in size. Strength is not in armor. Strength is not in rage. Strength is in control. Strength is in knowing when to strike, knowing when not to strike. His gaze turned to the human, though he did not call his name. Every cadet felt the weight of that unspoken truth. The human had become the example, the lesson that none of them would ever forget, and though the instructor's voice carried authority, even he knew his words were only shaping what had already been carved into the minds of all. The human remained silent. He gave no speech. He claimed no victory. He looked neither proud nor cruel. He simply stood with the same steady presence as before, his breath calm, his stance relaxed. Yet the cadets felt that very calmness as more terrifying than any roar. They had fought many battles in training. They had seen many foes fall, but never had they seen one who seemed untouchable, not because of armor or brute power, but because of mind, because of will, because of something beyond their understanding. The fear gnawed at them, sharp and quiet, harder to endure than any wound. The feathered ones folded their wings tightly, uneasy. The scaled ones lowered their heads, confused. The armored beasts shuffled their feet, unwilling to look directly at the human. They had thought themselves above him. They had thought themselves unshakable. Yet now they struggled even to meet his gaze. The fear was not loud. It did not come with screams. It came with silence, with the way their voices caught in their throats, with the way their pride refused to speak, with the way they stepped back without meaning to, as if giving space to something greater than themselves. One cadet finally spoke, his voice breaking, How, just how? But no one answered, not even the instructor, for the answer was already before them. It was not claws. It was not muscle. It was not armor. It was something that their people had never trained for, something their academy had never prepared them to face. A patience too deep to shatter, a silence too heavy to ignore, and a precision that could break the strongest with a single motion. They realized then that they were no longer mocking a human. They were standing in the presence of a predator they could not understand. The instructor barked an order: break, leave the hall, return tomorrow. His voice cracked through the silence. The cadets obeyed quickly, too quickly, eager to escape the weight of what they had seen. Their feet moved fast. Their claws clattered against the floor. Their wings brushed against each other. Yet even as they left, they kept looking back, their eyes drawn again and again to the small figure who still stood calm in the circle, the human who had spoken little, moved little, yet changed everything, the human who had shown them fear. As the cadets left in groups, whispers followed them down the corridors, whispers about the human, about his silence, about the broken captain, whispers they tried to keep quiet, whispers that spread nonetheless. No one dared to speak too loud, yet none could keep the words inside. The fear had taken root. It would grow. It would spread. And they all knew it. The academy would never be the same. Their view of humanity would never be the same. Their certainty in their own superiority had been shattered like bone beneath a precise hand. The human finally left the hall as well, his steps steady, his eyes calm. He did not walk faster than usual. He did not look around. He did not act as though he had achieved victory. He walked as though nothing unusual had happened. Yet behind him he left silence. Behind him he left unease. Behind him he left fear that none could shake away. The cadets watched from a distance, none daring to come near, none daring to challenge. The fragile one had become untouchable in their minds, and though they would never say it aloud, they knew the truth. They were afraid. That night in the barracks the cadets lay restless, their claws tapping against the edges of their beds, their wings twitching, their tails curling tight, their thoughts replaying the moment again and again, the sound of the crack, the sight of the captain falling, the calm silence of the human standing tall. Some tried to laugh softly to chase away the unease, but the laughter died in their throats, hollow and weak. Others whispered theories, excuses, tricks, but none satisfied the fear in their hearts, for the truth was simple, too simple to deny. They had seen power in a form they had never known. The instructor remained in his chamber, staring long into the night, his scars itching with the memory of the human's precision, his mind uneasy, his pride wounded, his respect unwilling but undeniable. He had taught that strength was muscle, that strength was armor, yet now he had seen something else, something more dangerous, something that would spread beyond this academy if left unchecked. The fear in his heart was not for the cadets, not for himself, but for what this meant about the world beyond, about the wars to come, about the rise of humanity. The academy was silent, but beneath that silence fear lived, fear that changed the way every cadet looked at the human, fear that would not fade, fear that would become respect, fear that would become caution, fear that would whisper in their minds whenever they thought of humanity, fear that had been planted in a single clash, in a single moment, by a single cadet who never raised his voice, never roared, never mocked, who only stood in silence and showed them what they had never wished to see. And so the night stretched long, filled with restless thoughts and uneasy dreams, and though morning would come, though training would continue, the academy had shifted forever, for the cadets now carried something heavier than scars, heavier than bruises, heavier than wounds. They carried fear, the kind of fear that does not leave, the kind of fear that reshapes the soul, the kind of fear born not of monsters or beasts, but of a human who stood in silence and refused to break. The dawn broke across the academy with light that poured through tall windows of stone and steel. Shadows stretched across the halls, where banners of alien worlds hung. The cadets gathered once more in silence, their voices hushed, their laughter gone, their pride wounded by what had been seen the day before. They stood in rows, their bodies tense, their eyes shifting nervously toward the small figure who walked among them with calm steps. The human cadet carried the same plain uniform, same steady breath, the same unreadable expression, yet to them he no longer looked small. He no longer looked weak. He no longer looked like prey. He looked like a shadow that stretched taller than all of them. The instructor entered with heavy boots striking against the floor, his scarred face hard as stone, his voice sharp and commanding. Yet beneath the command was something else, a weight he could not hide. He barked orders, calling the cadets to stand, to form circles, to prepare for the trials that would continue. But as he spoke, his eyes fell again and again on the human, his jaw tightening, his heart unsettled, for he knew that whatever training came next had already been reshaped by the events of yesterday. The academy itself had shifted, and no command could undo it. The cadets obeyed with discipline, yet their movements lacked the same arrogance. No one shoved, no one mocked, no one spat cruel words. Instead, they kept glancing toward the human, careful not to draw his gaze, careful not to let their whispers reach his ears. The fear still lived in their hearts, yet alongside it something else had begun to grow, something they did not want to name. Respect. They feared him, but they also respected him, and that respect cut deeper into their pride than any claw could. The trials began. Duels fought between cadets of different species, strength tested, speed measured, skill displayed. Blows rang out across the hall, roars echoed, wings snapped, tails struck, yet none of it carried the same weight as the memory of the human silence. The crowd watched each fight, but their thoughts drifted back to the single moment when pride had cracked like bone. They compared every clash to the one they had seen, and nothing measured up, for none of them could fight as he had fought. None of them could carry silence as he had carried it. When at last the instructor called for the human to step forward again, the hall grew still, claws stilled against the ground, wings folded tight, even breath slowed. All eyes locked on him, the fragile one they had mocked, the cadet they had scorned, the figure who now walked calmly into the circle as though the silence itself was his armor. He took his place. He raised his hand slightly, not as a boast, not as a roar of challenge, but as a gesture of readiness, calm and patient. The instructor studied him, then called forth another opponent. This time it was not the captain, not the strongest, but another cadet, one who stepped forward reluctantly, his eyes filled with unease, his claws trembling though he tried to hide it. He faced the human, but already his heart faltered, for the memory of yesterday was carved into him. He struck clumsily, his strength wasted, his movements heavy, and with a single shift of his stance the human redirected the blow. No fury, no anger, just control. The cadet stumbled and fell, the crowd gasped, and silence grew heavier still. The instructor called another, then another, and each time the result was the same. The human did not strike with cruelty. He did not attack with rage. He simply moved with precision, each motion exact, each breath steady. Each opponent defeated not with wounds, but with their own mistakes, their own pride, their own imbalance, until at last the instructor raised his hand and ended the sequence, his voice rough enough. The cadets are defeated. The lesson is clear. His eyes narrowed on the human, and though his words carried command, his tone carried respect he could not deny. The cadets stood in silence, their eyes lowered, their pride broken, their certainty dissolved. They had learned through humiliation, through fear, through awe. They had learned that power was not in claws or muscle, but in control, in silence, in patience. And the human had taught them this lesson without shouting, without boasting, without demanding. He had taught it by being unshaken, by refusing to break, by turning their scorn into his weapon, and their pride into their downfall. They looked at him differently now, not as weak, not as prey, but as something else, something dangerous, something untouchable. The instructor turned to the assembled cadets, his voice carrying across the chamber. Remember what you have seen. Remember what you have felt. Strength without wisdom is weakness. Pride without patience is ruin. Fear without understanding is surrender. You laughed at him. You mocked him. You called him soft flesh. Yet he stands while others have fallen. He is human, and you will remember this. His words thundered through the hall, and though many wished to deny it, many wished to bury it, they could not. The truth had already carved itself into them. The human listened in silence, his gaze calm, his posture steady. He sought no praise. He offered no words. He simply returned to his place among them. Yet his presence loomed larger than any roar, larger than any victory cry. His silence was enough. His silence was everything, and the cadets knew that nothing would erase it. Nothing would undo it. Nothing would return them to the arrogance they had carried before. For once you feel fear of something you mocked, you never forget it. Once you respect what you once scorned, you never return to ignorance. As the day wore on, the cadets trained, they fought, they ran, they endured the trials of the academy. Yet beneath every task the memory remained. The human had changed them. The human had changed the academy. And though none of them spoke it aloud, though none of them would admit it, they knew the galaxy itself would one day change as well. For if one cadet could do this with silence, with patience, with precision, what could his people do in war? What could his people do in battle? What could his people do when united with that same unshakable calm? The lesson was burned into them, not by words, not by speeches, but by the crack of bone, the silence of calm, the presence of one who refused to bend. The human had shown them what it meant to face patience sharpened into a weapon, silence turned into armor, knowledge wielded like a blade. And none of them would ever forget. They carried it in their bones, in their hearts, in their thoughts, a weight they could not cast aside. When night fell once more, the cadets lay restless again, but this time it was not only fear that haunted them. It was respect. It was curiosity. It was wonder. They whispered softer. They thought deeper. They began to see the human not as weakness, but as mystery, not as prey, but as teacher, not as soft flesh, but as something more. And though the future remained unwritten, though battles yet lay ahead, they all knew that the lesson of this day, the lesson of silence, would guide them long after. The academy walls had faded from memory,